Hi everyone, it's Mr. Stewart here with your assignment video for the animation course Level 1, Week 2. So this is our very first animation assignment, and if you're going to be working in Maya, this is the assignment video for you. So this is Maya on my screen right now, and before we get started, I want everyone to take a nice, big, deep breath and relax. There are so many buttons and so many menus, and Maya can do so many things. This is a very serious piece of software, and I've used Maya for about 15 years, and there are parts of Maya I have never even touched. I literally have never used. I'm going to focus specifically on the animation controls, the animation menus, the things that you're going to need to be able to learn to animate. Now that means there are going to be lots of things we're not going to do. We're not going to do modeling. We're not going to do rigging. We're not going to do particles or effects or rendering or lights or anything else like that. We're just going to focus on animation. So this is Maya 2018, and different versions of Maya look different, but generally speaking, most of the functionality is going to be similar. Most of the menus are going to be the same. Most of the buttons are going to be the same, and the icons may look a little bit different, but the different menus and access are going to be in the same spot in the interface. Now, when you first open Maya, usually you'll see a camera area like this. There's different workspaces. I'm working with Maya Classic right now. If you hit your button here, you can see that there's a lot of different ones. I tend to like to stick with the Maya Classic. You can experiment around with different menu sets like this if you would like, but for the moment we're going to stick with the Maya Classic workspace. Now, when you take your mouse and you hold it over a window, if you hit just tap the spacebar, you will see that it splits this into a number of different views. Now I'm going to create a couple of pieces of geometry here, and I'll go over that a little bit later, but just to give you some context. So it's a good way to think about Maya is to think about it as you would stop motion animation. We're not going to be drawing in Maya. What we'll be doing is moving and controlling different what we call geometry, different models, different things, and Maya kind of works in its own sort of virtual space. And you can see here in all of these different windows that at the bottom there is a label for that window: the perspective, side, front, and top. So I'm looking at these objects from different angles. Now, I can control what is in that window by going to the panel menu. Now, if you'll look at the top of each window, you can see that these menus are all the same. So I can change each of these to any number of different things. But I'm going to create a new perspective window here. And if I scroll out here a bit, what you see is that this camera right here is connected to this window right here. This is the Perspective 1 camera. Now I can click over here and rename it. But as I move this camera around, you can see that it moves this window around. And that's what each of these windows is connected to. Each of them is connected to their own camera. And that camera is controlling what we see in the window. Now, if I hold my mouse over a window and tap the space bar, it will activate that window for the entire screen So I can go back and forth from different angles and look at my animation or my environment from a different angle. But we can also move and navigate around a window without touching the camera. So that I'm going to talk about it in Windows. You'll use the Command button, I believe, in Mac, but in Windows you're going to use the Alt key on your keyboard. So if you press the Alt key on your keyboard and then your left mouse button, then you can, the left mouse button will spin you around the environment. If I use the Alt key and my middle mouse button, I can go side to side, and if I press and hold the Alt key and press and hold my left and middle mouse button together, it can zoom in. So as you see here, I'm actually moving the position of the camera by toggling and scrolling and zooming. So that's what's going on with Maya. Now anytime I want to get rid of something, I can select it and hit the backspace key and it will get rid of it. Now, if you do not have a 3-button mouse, then I would suggest that you press pause on the video and you go and get a 3-button mouse and come back. It is that important. You're really going to need a 3-button mouse. So much of the controls are based on a 3-button mouse, so that middle mouse button becomes very, very important. Now, if you have a mouse that has a scroll wheel in it, a lot of times that scroll wheel will act as the middle mouse button, so you can use a mouse like that. Even on a Mac, though, you're going to want to get a mouse that has 3 buttons. Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the user interface. Now, there's lots of different objects and things that are around the screen. So the timeline is down here. You can see this number line here. Each of these numbers is a frame, and Maya is by default set to run at 24 frames per second. So that's going to be the 24 frames per second is the standard. It's the default for film and video in animation. So so that's what Maya is set at. That's what we're going to be working at. And that's really important to remember. So if I want to make approximately 4 seconds, then I'm going to need approximately 100 frames. If I have 1,000 frames, it's going to be much longer. I'm not going to be able to get something to last 4 seconds if I have a lot of frames. So that's the connection between the frames and the time that it takes to play something. Now I can, you can see here, I can adjust this timeline with this little bar here. I can also adjust the timeline with these numbers. So this, if I double click on the middle of the bar, it will show me the outside numbers. It will give me the maximum here. So if I change this to 300, then my timeline has actually got 300 frames in it. I'm just only displaying 200. If I double click this, it will show me the entire timeline. This will show me a section of the timeline if there's a piece of the animation I want to work on, but I still have the outside frame. So that's how these numbers and this bar are connected together. Now you'll also see there's a number of different shelves, and they have all sorts of different buttons, and they're going to be really, we're not going to use these a ton, but it's good to know about them. As we get moving more in the future, there will be more reason to use some of the controls on these shelves. On the left here, you're going to see this is these are different tools that I'll be using in Maya. So the scale tool, the rotate tool, and the translate tool. Translate also means move. And so you'll see sometimes move, sometimes translate up here. But these are going to be very important because in Maya, those are the three things that, that we can do to an object. We can move it, we can scale it, and we can rotate it. Now, sometimes you'll see this here where dots will show up on the screen. What I am in now is in component mode. There's component mode and there's object mode. We want to be in object mode for animation. Component mode is for other rigging, modeling, different ways to work. So if you ever find yourself and you've hit a button accidentally and you see these purple and yellow dots, just hold your mouse over the object, right click, and go to object mode. When you do, everything will turn green and you'll be back set, ready to animate. Now, you'll also sometimes get a you'll also sometimes be in a situation where you'll be missing, say, something like the time slider. All of a sudden you'll close it accidentally. You can undock it. So if I want to undock something, I grab this right here. Sometimes I will undock the range slider and then I hit close here and now I don't know how to get it back. So if that happens, you can go to Windows, UI Elements, and you can see that the time slider and the range slider have been unchecked. And if I recheck those, it will bring back the different elements. And then I can redock them by sort of hovering over, and you'll see a blue line. At that point, it will redock the different objects. I'm sorry, the different elements for your user interface. Now over here with this little guy and the gears, this is our preferences. Now there are lots and lots of preferences, but I'm going to just bring up a couple. First off, it'll usually come up set here at time slider, and over here you'll see playback. Now I'll explain why in a little bit, but right now I want you to set this at 24 frames per second times 1, and then you'll see the maximum playback speed will kind of gray out. And then hit save. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is the help menu here, and specifically some ways to learn Maya on your own. If you go here and click on the Maya Learning channel, this will bring up the Autodesk YouTube channel. And it's going to give you lots of different options, tons and tons of videos. I would suggest sticking with getting started, especially the interface tour, navigating with cameras, some of these basic ideas. And then the animation as well. This will give you a little bit more. Now, a lot of times they're going to lump in rigging into animation. Animators in the studios do not rig. We do not model. We only animate. So I would focus on things that are going to help you navigate through Maya and things that are going to help you animate in Maya. All right, so, and before we get started animating, I'm going to do one more thing, which is to change your menu set to animation. Now, you'll see what happens is that these menus up here change. These first few remain the same, and they'll be the same in any menu set. But it's nice to keep everything in animation. A lot of the tools that we'll talk about later in the class are going to come from these menus. So usually students, once they change that, they're never going to need to change it again. All the tools that we need are going to be in that menu set. Okay, so let's get started animating. And in order to animate, we're going to need a ball. I'm going to create a few little obstacles here. Already got these two. We can do this a couple of different ways. The poly modeling shelf, it's very easy to create a sphere or a different, I'm going to create a plane there to create kind of a floor. I'm going to go to the scale button and scale this out. Now this sort of interior grid that you see, that's kind of there, you can turn that off by going to the show menu and turning off the grid. Now turning it off in one window though does not turn it off in another window. You kind of have to turn it off by each window. Now you can also create geometry by going to create, polygon primitives, and sphere. And then I am hitting the hotkeys to help me move and rotate the different objects. Now I can rotate, I can scale, and I can translate. I can access those tools by hitting the R for scale, the E for rotate, and the W key for move. That's a little bit easier, and the Q key will move me to select. So that's a little bit easier to access the different tools and manipulators. Okay, now you'll also see over here in the right hand is the channel box. If you don't see the channel box, it's connected to this little icon up here, all these layers, and it's really helpful. The channel box will show me what I have selected and the different attributes that I can adjust. So if I have the sphere selected, you can see these 3 X, Y, and Z channels are for moving. And as I move the object in these different axes, then you can see the values change. The same thing is apparent for rotations, and the same thing is apparent for scale. And I can scale in individual channels as well. So now, whenever I get kind of way off the beaten track and I want to bring everything back to normal, I can also enter in values here. And if I hit 0 for translate and rotate and 1 for scale, it will bring me back to the original default position that I started with. Now, just a warning, there are lots of hotkeys that are set by default in Maya. And so many times you'll find yourself hitting a key not exactly knowing what it is going to do. And accidentally, things will begin to move around. That's pretty normal. It's sometimes really unavoidable to accidentally hit keys. As you get more comfortable, you'll start to realize what some of these do, but I'm not going to talk about them too much in the beginning. But if your camera starts moving around, what you can do is hit the bracket keys, and those will show you the previous camera position and the next camera position. So you can toggle back and forth through those a little bit. All right, so I'm going to create one more obstacle here, and I'm going to move it into the position that I want. And maybe make it a little skinnier so that I can and I'm going to make this really long and tall. Okay, so now I'm going to begin to animate. So this is going to be done by setting keys on specific frames. So I want to be very aware of where I'm at on the timeline, because wherever I'm at, that's where I'm going to set the key. So I'm going to start off here, and move the ball to where I want the key to occur. And I'm actually going to have it bounce from right to left here. So once I have it in the air, then I am going to hit the S key, and the S key is going to create a key. Now you see when I hit the S key, a couple things happen. So a red line shows up on frame 1, and these red lines show up in the channel box. Now this means that I have a key in this position on this frame for this object. I can only set a key on an object if I have it selected. So I'm going to go a few frames ahead here and move the object to a new position. And then I'm going to hit the S key again. Now, it's always good to be looking at it from different angles. I like to toggle around in the perspective view. A lot of other animators like to have multiple windows open at the same time so they can see it from different angles, because you get a little bit better sense of where it is if you can see it from all these different angles. Now I'm going to hit the, you can see a couple things here have happened. So I have moved everything, but there's no red line, and these have kind of turned to pink. This pink means that there are keys on the object, but there's not a key on the frame that I'm currently on. So I have to hit the S key again, and then they will turn red, and then we will see a red key and line on the frame 6. And now the computer is going to automatically fill in the gaps between my keys. This is called in-betweening. Some people call it tweening. But basically, the computer is figuring out where it wants the mathematical position that the ball should be at in between those frames. Now, there is a little bit of a shortcut that I like to work with. It's called auto key. It takes away that hitting of the S button. So it's this button right here that has these lines going around it and a little bit of a plus sign. And if you click on that, you'll see that this turns red. Now, if there is a key on an object, an auto key is on. So I have to set the first key manually and hit the S key. But once one key is on that object, then whenever I move it, you can see that it automatically is keying the channels that I'm moving, and automatically setting that key on the timeline. Now, this is going to be really nice. It's really easy to use, and it really takes away from that unfortunate situation that arises a lot of times when I move my object, I don't hit the S key, and then that key disappears. All of a sudden it feels like nothing's happening. So that's why I like to use auto key. But one of the things that happens when you use auto key is you can see that it's not setting a key on all of the different channels. In order for that to happen, I do have to hit the S key again to get all of those channels. Now, that's important for a couple of reasons, but we'll go into that in the future. Right now, I'm going to talk to you about the graph editor. Now, the graph editor is a great way to visualize the motion and control the motion and help sort of edit the motion through graphs. Now, you can see that we have the X, Y, and Z space here, and that's kind of how everything is lined up. And so for each channel on the in the channel box here, I'm going to have a graph to control that channel. So I can access the graph editor in a couple of different ways. I can always go to Windows, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor. And it's going to bring up the graph editor right here. And you're going to see that I have all of these different graphs that coincide with all of these different channels on the channel box. So right now I have the entire sphere selected, so I'm seeing all of the different graphs. If I want to see an individual graph, like the Translate X graph, then that I can click on that and just see that. And I can always kind of go back and forth. So you're seeing with Translate Z, Rotate, don't really have a whole lot of Rotate yet. But all of these are editable for me to be able to change the motion. So you'll see this if I grab this Rotate key here. I'm going to go to that frame. And I use my middle mouse button to control the keys and the handles in the graph editor. So if I use my middle mouse and click and drag, then you'll see that the object begins to rotate. Now, even if I'm not on a key, I can control that by selecting left click and drag and selecting the handle here. And then I use my middle mouse to move it. So you can see that the graph itself, the line itself, controls the movement. So we want our graphs to be smooth. And so these handles become very important in how we control the animation. So if I want the Translate X movement, the forward movement, to be a little bit smoother, I have to have it hit here in the middle of this donut. So here I can move this and just line it up, grab these handles, and make everything nice and smooth to give me a little bit more clean motion. Now, I've made it rotate, which I really don't want it to do. So I can click and drag with my left mouse button, select something, and hit the backspace key, and it will delete that key. And then I've still got this, so I could move it manually, but I also have these different options up here to control the handles. This flat one will make it flat. Now it only made the side that I had selected. If I want the whole handle to be flat, I need to select the key and hit the flat button, and it will do both handles. So now you can see that rotation is gone from my ball. Now I can look at my animation a couple of different ways. I'm left clicking and dragging back and forth, and you can see that I am doing what's called scrubbing to be able to look at my animation. I can also at any time hit the play button, and it will play my animation. Now this brings us back to that moment earlier when I had our preferences open. Many times the default setting for Maya is play every frame, and the maximum playback speed is free. And if you can see, if I save this, now it is playing almost unrecognizable. So I have a lot of times students thinking, oh, I need to create a lot more frames so it will slow down. Then when they create the video of their animation, it is moving as if it was in mud or underwater. So I want to make sure that I set these at 24 frames per second and hit save. When I do, now it's telling this button that it should play at the same level that it's going to make the video, because it's always going to make the video at 24 frames per second. Okay, so now let's get into really working on the animation, trying to make this look a little more realistic. So I'm going to do a couple of things here and kind of finish out this animation here. And I'm gonna, I like to have my graph editor open while I am animating, because it gives me a good sort of visual of what's going on. And you can see I don't have the entire graph editor open here, but I'll try to see what's happening. And I'm going to get this kind of working. And then have it bounce back at a certain point here, and then maybe bounce over again. Okay, so this gives me kind of a basic view of my animation. And so you can see that I want every separation of the keys to be about the same. And right now, these two keys are a little bit closer together time-wise than these two. So I want to move these keys. So I can do this a couple of different ways. I can do this in the graph editor, where I can click and drag around those keys. I like to hold the shift key down and then use my middle mouse button, because then it will only move left or right. If I don't, I can move things up and down, and as you go to this key, you'll start to see that it gets really strange. All sorts of things are happening. Now, if that happens, what I can do is hit the Z key. If I make a mistake, my undo key is Z. I don't even have to hit Control Z. And usually the Q by default is set to about 50. This is another place in the preferences. You can go to undo here. It's usually set to finite and 50. I usually leave it at infinite and hit save. But because of that, I can undo as many times as I want. I can go back and undo a lot of my mistakes. I can also then hit Shift Z and redo some. So if I go back too far, I can come back and get to where I want. So that's one way to move the keys. I can also move the keys by using the timeline. So if I hold the Shift key and I hit just click on a frame with my middle mouse button, it will turn red. Then I can use my middle mouse button and click and drag it to a new frame, and you'll see it'll move all those keys. Now, Maya is set up so that there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing, and you'll find this in all sorts of different menus, and there's just lots of different ways. There's not one right way and there's not one wrong way. It's just Maya likes to give the user a lot of different options. So you can usually find what way works best for you, and then that will be the way that you do it, and part of your system. Okay, so now we have our animation basically set up. I'm going to look at it with the play button. Now it looks okay, but it doesn't necessarily look terribly natural, like a ball that's bouncing around. It just kind of looks like a ball that's moving around. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some adjustments in the graph editor to make this a little more natural. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is work with the translate Y curve. The translate Y is going to be the up and down of the ball, specifically only the up and down of the ball. And I want it to sort of pop off the ground and bounce off the ground. So I'm going to grab these bottom three keys, and I'm going to start adjusting the handles. So I'm going to pick this one, which is called linear tangents. What that means is that the handle of the key will point directly at the next key. Now I can adjust these, but then you can see I get some weird artifacting with my other side of the handle. So what I can do is when I select these handles, I can hit this button, break tangents. Now you'll see a dotted line, and what that means is I can move these independently of each other. So I'm going to break the tangents of these, Now, by creating this sort of sharp point, I am making a very quick change in the movement. And by doing that, all of a sudden, I have a much nicer sense of the movement. And then, since it's going to do kind of the same thing off of this wall, I want to do the same thing to the translate X right where it changes direction. So I'm going to break the tangents there, and I'm going to hit linear curves. And then I'm going to kind of try to smooth these out as best I can. So once I've done that, now you'll see that I get that same kind of feel off of the wall, like that. And so this is a nice feel to my bouncing ball. Now, when you are finished and you're ready to turn in your work, you are going to do something called a play blast. And a play blast is going to be how you turn in your work. But before you do that, you're going to go to File, and you're going to Save Scene or Save Scene As, and that's how you're going to save your file. Now that, though, you're going to save on your computer. You're not going to turn in that file. You can, but different files work differently, and we can't, not everybody is going to have the capacity to open your file on their machine. So we're going to have you turn in a video. But making this video doesn't do anything other than make a video of your animation. It's just like taking a picture. It doesn't save your animation. It only takes a picture of your animation. So in order to save your animation, you're going to need to go to File, hit Save Scene, find a location you want to save in your documents, and then there's going to be two file types, Maya ASCII and Maya Binary. Doesn't really matter which one you use, but whichever one you use, stick with that one. Maya doesn't like to switch gears in the middle, so sometimes you'll see an error that says unknown nodes can't save the file. That's usually because this has gotten switched. So just go back here and switch this from Maya Binary to Maya ASCII and enter a name. Hit save, and you'll see here it has saved this file. So once I then exit out, I can go to a new scene, or I can go to open scene, open my bouncing ball, file, don't need to save, and my animation is still here. So once it's all saved safely on your computer, now you're going to turn in your animation movie. And the way we're going to do this, you want to kind of line it up the way you like it in your viewport. And then right-click on the timeline and go to this option, Play Blast, and open the option box. Now there's going to be a few different options for you here. I usually want to put the scale at 1, quality at 100. If you have the opportunity to do a QuickTime, that usually works best. An AVI is fine. An image sequence I wouldn't recommend, but if you have to, you can do that as well. So I'm going to go to QuickTime. I'm going to use the H.264 encoding. Now display size, I could make it from my window, which will be the exact size of my window here, or I can do from my render settings. Now my render settings are going to be up in this area, right here with this clapboard and gear. And the image size you can see is going to be right there. You can scroll down and pick. I wouldn't go higher than HD 720. This is going to be perfectly fine for the purposes of our class. So that means it's going to render the or play blast the animation from the render settings. but I would always click render off screen. This way you're going to see it in the background. It's going to happen in the background. You won't actually see it go through the frames, but it's going to be a little more stable. Now, then I want to click this where it says Save to File. And now I'm going to browse and go to my desktop here and put in bouncing ball, and I usually like to put in version 1. So I'm going to hit save and then play blast. Now you can see that it is going through the frames, but I don't see any changes. That's perfectly fine. But now it has created my bouncing ball animation. And when I open that up here, for some reason it is not wanting to show. So if that happens, I would go back and replay blast with a different encoder. I'm going to do a JPEG or none. Animation is probably fine. So let's do none and play blast. Now it's going to ask me to overwrite it. I can if I want, or if I want to do a different, completely different new movie. That's why I like to put in this version. I just put in version 2. And now it's going to open this up. And unfortunately, it's looking like something's going on with QuickTime here. Sometimes this takes a little bit of time to figure out. And sometimes it's even worth uploading to Google Drive to see if it'll work. But now I'm going to try one more time and go with AVI here, and I'm going to leave that at nothing, and now go to version 3. So depending on your computer, depending on your setup, you're going to want to play around with those video settings. But now you can see I have my animation, I have my video file. And this is what I'm going to turn in. But again, all this is a video. It is not, I can't go back and say open and open that video. It's not going to work. The only thing I can open in Maya are .mb files, Maya binary, or .ma files, Maya ASCII. So if you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, good luck, and I'll see you next week.